It's the Deets. In association with What's Good Calgary, starring your host, Duddy Does It. Featuring Adrienne Krause.
I'd draw a whole circus scene, and it'd be like, where's Waldo? But I'd be like, where's little Jeff over here?
That wouldn't work well if you had a client that's like, so what are you writing?
And I'd be like, find me. You can't find me, I bet. Should we go? We're rolling. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes.
People don't like to introduce themselves, but I make them do it anyway.
Okay. Do you have like a repertoire? Are you supposed to hit certain points about yourself? How do you do that?
No, just your name, who you are, what you do, and then we'll deep dive after that.
Okay, amazing. My name is Adrienne Krause. I am a registered provisional psychologist, which is kind of like a fancy term for a therapist who is kind of completing all their hours to be fully registered.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I had a bit written down where I didn't know how to pronounce your name, and we've known each other our whole lives. I don't know why I didn't do it. I got nervous last second. But thanks. So let's just start with how did you get into this field? What got you started? Start from the beginning, not your birth, but like
in the beginning, at my conception. So as a youngster, when we spent most of our time together, I was always very interested in people's behavior and like why they did certain things. I think I was a very empathetic child, very curious. I like talking to people about their lives, their history, their experiences. And as I got older, I kind of discovered, that's psychology. Like that's what that is wanting to understand people's behavior and their thoughts behind the reasons that they do things. But I also didn't think I was smart enough to be a psychologist. So I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to have it as a hobby. I'll read books, that sort of thing. So I went to school for sociology as my undergrad, thinking I'll just have a degree because people are supposed to have degrees, and then I'll go do other things. And then I did. I went and I was a personal trainer for almost a decade, which was great, and I loved it, and working with people and their bodies. But what I really liked was the stories people would tell me and the things that they would talk about, like their triumphs and their resiliency and their family lives, and their drama, all of those pieces of it. And so during that process, I was like, I don't know if it's like enough for me. I don't know if I'm fulfilled. I really still doubted my ability to be a therapist, thinking, I won't be successful at school. It'll be too hard I'm not sure if I'm likable. I don't know if people will like my vibe. I'm not sure if I have anything to offer in this realm. But my stepdad and my husband were like, well, why would you kind of like settle if you're not feeling fulfilled? Like, why not you?
Did you get into personal training to help people? Like, do you think that was just without thinking about it, that's what you're doing? Like a step on the way to becoming a psychologist?
Maybe. I haven't really analyzed it. I think physical activity was always something that I really turned to for my own mental health, and something that I put a lot of like effort and time into. I think helped me through a lot of things. And so I do think, it makes sense as a natural progression of this has been so helpful for me. It's always been, the kind of like backbone of how I support myself in a way that I do self-care. And so it was, I think, a natural jump to doing that with other people and showing them, how movement and working out and appreciating your body and feeling stronger has a lot of mental health benefits.
Maybe I should be a therapist. I nailed that one.
This is like psychoanalyzing. Perfect.
So when you're working, do you talk to people about diet and physical also? Like, do you incorporate that at all?
Not so much. I think it's tricky with things like diet culture. People's experiences with food and exercise is always very personal. So I think like where it applies and it makes sense, yes. I think it's pretty basic knowledge that if you are not moving your body in any way, you know, you're very sedentary, you don't do a lot, you're always sitting at a desk or you're always sitting on a couch, that's pretty common knowledge that that's not going to lead to very positive mental health.
But you kind of keep that separate. What about like supplements and things like that?
No, that would be like we consider like out of my scope of practice. So as a personal trainer, even that, it's like I can prescribe movements for your body and the things that will help you get stronger, but the diet and like supplement side of it is a different thing. But again, there's like common knowledge. It's like if you're not getting enough calories in a day, if you're not eating enough from, you know, getting enough protein, if you're like cutting carbs, there are going to be mental health effects of that. So apart from talking about it in a very loose kind of, this is generalized like knowledge, and let's address if it is an aspect of something that is not working for you. I don't like do a joint like, here, take magnesium, or here, take all these supplements, or here's an exercise regime.
So I feel like we skipped over a lot in your life story there, but now we're on to your job already. Are you do you specialize in a specific thing?
Yeah, so I think in terms of like the populations that I work with, I would say I don't specialize with like a group of people, but I guess maybe I specialize in like the therapies or the modalities that I use. So I like to say I'm a relational therapist and I'm an attachment-based therapist, and then I pull from other pieces of different modalities depending on, you know, what I'm doing.
What does that mean?
I think that's a very good question.
Thanks.
So some therapists, excuse me, label themselves as like a CBT, which would be like a cognitive behavioral therapist, or a DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy, or they're like existential psychologists. So there's different modalities. Relational, I guess the crux of, or not the crux, but the basis of relational-based therapy is emphasizing the importance of relationships in kind of everything that we do. So relationships shape the way that we interact with the world. They shape the way we interact with ourselves. And then, you know, as the therapist, like that relationship is so integral to a person's progress and what they get from therapy. So the relational aspect of it to me really means that, you know, I get to sit in a room with a person as another person, like as a human. I don't, you know, I'm not putting on a white coat. It's not this clinical situation where you're coming and I'm saying, here are all your problems. Here's how you treat them. You know, we're sitting, we're having a conversation. You get to know a little bit about who I am so that we develop a relationship where there's trust. There's, you know, there's no judgment. You feel free to be yourself. And that's really important to me.
So what's your process with someone new? How long does it take to kind of gain a repertoire? And
I think it's so different. Yeah, so some people you meet and I think there's like an immediate comfort. And I think it goes both ways. There's like an immediate connection and there's immediate understanding. And it's just kind of like in the real world. Sometimes you meet people and there's just like a clicking that happens. And then I think given that therapy is a space where you're kind of expected to be vulnerable and open and talk about really hard things with certain people, maybe there's like a comfort, and hopefully that's why they chose you. Is I'm hoping people choose me because on, you know, our first consultation, our first meeting, they're saying, wow, this person seems relatable, or this person seems easy to talk to, or this person seems to know a lot about the issues that I'm having. But it takes them a little bit longer to get to a place where they trust you with the things that have happened, and they trust you with talking about their lives, and they trust that you're going to have a good response and a reaction that really makes them feel seen and heard. So I would say some people it's first session and they are so ready to talk and they can really get into it. And some people, I think sometimes the first session is really light. I ask so many questions, you know, I try to make them laugh a bit so we can, you know, again, build that rapport, so we get to a point later when we're talking about things that are really like hard. Am I allowed to swear? I almost said shitty.
You can swear.
Okay.
You can swear.
When we get to the things that are really shitty, they don't have like a sense of anxiety about like, okay, how is this person going to respond? Because they know me well enough to know that it's going to be safe.
Yeah. I had a fan question here that I don't even understand. It says, you have a humanistic approach. why do you like that versus behaviorism and psychoanalysis? I don't know what that means, by the way. On the way here, I listened to a Psych 101 podcast.
I love that. Yeah.
So I got Freud and Pavlov.
Sweet.
And then it was only a 15-minute drive. So
yeah, that's as far as you got. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so these are just different lenses with how we look at things. And so a humanistic approach, again, it's like it encompasses pieces of like relational based therapy and attachment based therapy. But it really, I think, believes in kind of the person as their own expert on their experiences, and being kind of the, let's call it, kind of like the champion of themselves. Like, you know, your own experience is the best. You know when something's working versus not working. It's like believing in the power of the individual, and building meaning in what makes sense for them. Mm-hmm. And so I think with any like way anyone does therapy nowadays, for the most part, is that we kind of take pieces of these lenses to combine them versus picking a lens that it's like, this is the only way we look at it. So whereas a behavioral approach is maybe like less interested in like the meaning making that is happening from your behavior, or like why you're doing certain things. It's like, let's just really address this behavior and change the behavior with hopes that we would have like a symptom reduction or hopes that things would improve. The very like isolated lens or way of looking at things, I think, is helpful from like a learning perspective. For a therapist, is to know like what are the roots of all these different lenses. But in terms of the way we practice therapy, I would say the majority of people are not addressing it from like one of these very strict lenses.
What about like a psychiatrist?
Mm-hmm.
How would they approach it?
I think based on my knowledge and from my experiences would be that like psychiatrists are mostly about symptom management. And so we incorporate psychologists in the mental health field, and like they're used when there's like a level of severity to symptoms that are probably in need of assistance outside of what like counseling therapy can offer. So that's if we're talking about, something as, like schizophrenia, which would need like medicinal support as well as talk therapy. Mm-hmm. But that also can include things like depression or ADHD. Usually you would want someone who has expertise in like the drug implications and the medicinal implications for these types of things, in conjunction with like what therapy would provide.
I feel like it's changed a lot. When I first went to the doctor for ADD, he didn't even ask me a question. Like 10, 15 years ago, just gave me a bunch of pills. And now it's much harder. Now they won't even give them to me. They're like, you have to go see someone.
Okay. So. Yeah, I think that's so funny because I think some people would say it's become easier. But I think like for accessing medication, it is becoming harder. But there's parts of that are good and that are bad, because we do want to make people have like the right diagnoses and like have seen a psychiatrist and have had full-fledged like assessments to know what we're really treating, versus a doctor who maybe doesn't have the same training, or even like a therapist who isn't trained in assessments being like, oh yeah, you absolutely have ADHD, like you should go get medicine for this. It's like, I think we do need that comprehensive holistic view of care where there are psychologists and in some cases psychiatrists, and there are doctors who are working together so that treatment makes
Speaking
sense.
of assessments, I wrote down from my little thing, what assessment do you find the most helpful?
So I don't actually do assessments.
Okay.
Yeah, so as a counseling therapist, the bulk of my work is in, again, like that relational aspect is so talking with people, not doing any sort of like labeling or diagnosing. So usually if I have a client that wants that, I would like send them to their doctor for referral to a psychiatrist, or we do have people that do assessments as psychologists, but it's very expensive if you don't have benefits. So there's tons of barriers there.
What do you think of the law of attraction and the secret in that type stuff?
Can you elaborate?
Not really. No. You know the law,
like manifestation type thinking. Yeah. I think it can be a tool. I mean, I think the more that you think good things are coming your way, and the more that you have like a positive outlook, it's kind of like that saying, like, what you believe you can achieve. And I think that there is absolutely some power in that, right? Like someone who believes in themselves and believes in their future and is motivated in that way, like having that thought process absolutely can help you get there. But I guess it doesn't mean that you don't have to also do the work, right? You can't just like journal, you know, by 2026 I'm going to be a millionaire, and then like that's going to happen for you. It's like, okay, well, like, and what are all the steps, and what do you value about being a millionaire, right? There's so many other pieces to it. So I think it can be like a helpful tool, and the more that you believe in it, maybe the more that you work for that manifestation. But it's like, is that manifestation, or is that hard work, or is that both?
Yeah. I don't know why that popped into my head, but so do you, over learning this whole time, have you taken things for your own life and apply it to your own life often? Oh yeah,
I think like all the time. I've said this before. I think one of the maybe like frustrating but really cool and beneficial parts of being a therapist is that it's really hard to sit in rooms with people day after day and, you know, work with them about like their meaning and their process and their behavior and their thoughts and their relationships, and then go home and like apply none of that to your own life. It's, you know, you're talking the talk, but you're not walking the walk, and that strikes me as being very inauthentic. And I think like your clients know that. I think that when you're sitting in a room with someone, they can read if you yourself are an emotionally healthy person. You know, there's the trust that I develop with my clients, and the relationships that I have. I don't think that I could go home and then not be basically like practicing what I preach.
Do you ever get new like anxieties or things like that you didn't know you had through talking to people?
I don't think new anxieties. I think for, you know, I've only been in private practice for about 1.5 years now. And I think there was, and there still sometimes is, maybe like an anxiety or an urge of kind of like that imposter syndrome takes over, where it's like, do I have enough knowledge on this topic to speak to it? Do I have what it takes to help this person? Am I helping this person? Like, do I know enough? I think that there's the self-doubt piece of it sometimes comes up, especially because I work with so many fantastic people. I have tons of great colleagues. I have a really great supervisor, you know, and talking to all these people, the way that they handle things and like with their expertise, sometimes it's hard not to start kind of self-assessing of like, oh, do I need to like do more schooling? Do I need to go get a PhD? Do I need to do these like 10 trainings this year? And so I try to slow myself down and, you know, reflect on my work and like the clients that come back and on the feedback that I get from both clients and colleagues and my supervisor to say like, hey, you are where you need to be and what you're doing is enough. And I think it's hard when you're in the business of helping people to feel like you're always doing enough.
Speaking of self-assessments, we were talking about TikTok and people self-assessing and TikTok psychologists kind of thing. So I want to get your opinion on that. Yeah.
I love this like age of information, and I think that there are a lot of great I think there's like a lot of great therapists on TikTok who are putting out kind of these, you know, these, I'm going to age myself here, but like these videos or the TikToks, they're just called TikToks, right? Reels? I don't know.
We can call them anything.
Like tidbits, right? Of like information.
Tidbits,
that are great, right? So they're like, yeah, let's talk about boundaries and like what are boundaries, or they're like, let's talk about attachment styles and what are these attachment styles. And there's so much you can get from these like little tidbits that people can generalize to their life, like take away, and that are very helpful. And then on the same, you know, on the other side of that coin, I think there are people who like attend therapy or like learn things, and then they come on their TikToks and they're like, well, my therapist said this and they taught me all about this. But it's like what you do in the room with a therapist is like very individualized to you and your experience and your circumstances and your life, and is not always widely applicable to everybody else. So I think taking everything we hear with a grain of salt, when it comes to therapy in this like generalized sense and like what is popular on TikTok and what is going viral, or someone talking about their experiences, yeah, like that's maybe one lens, or that's one way to look at it, or that's that person's experience. And so I'm like, it's great to have the knowledge. I think it can be super helpful, but I think people should be careful not to replace it with like their own individualized experience in therapy and what they could get. And then I think that there are just like unhealthy or like emotionally unhealthy people who take concepts that maybe they've learned in TikTok or in therapy, and don't always apply them like in healthy ways.
And does it bother you when people use like say like, oh, I'm so ADD or I'm so bipolar, and they just use it as like a throwaway word when they're not, and they're like hyper that day, or they were just maybe sad that day?
I guess I wouldn't say that it like bothers me. I think I understand what people's meaning are when they use those terms or they say them. I think that if it's, you know, we have to be careful with, again, the media usage of it, or like people just being like, oh, they're so bipolar, because that can be really stigmatizing and that can make people feel like really ashamed. It's often not accurate to like what that person is experiencing. So I think
maybe takes away from the actual issue also.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's like a deflection and people use it because it's like funny. And so I wouldn't say like on an individualized basis, you know, if a client was like, oh, I'm so ADD today, like I wouldn't be like, that's harmful. But I would be like, oh, let's explore that. You know, like, what do you mean by that? And how's that showing up? Oh, is there a different word we could use for it? You know, but it's not like rattling, but it can be stigmatizing in a lot of environments. So I think we have to be careful with how we use it.
Yeah, people use them. Like some people say, oh, I forgot my wallet, I'm going to have a panic attack. And I'm like, are you okay? And they're like, what? Yeah, no, I just forgot my wallet. And I'm like actually worried because I've had panic attacks. I'm like, oh, are you feeling like you're dying? And they're like, no.
No, not at all.
Just left my wallet.
Well, and that's I think a great topic too, is like how much are we getting like using these terms in such a like throwaway way that now we're diluting from like the importance of them. So something like a panic attack is like terrifying. And like one of the, you know, like the symptoms of a panic attack is like a genuine feeling of like, I'm not going to make it out of this.
Yeah, I've been to the emergency room a couple times, and they're like, you're fine. You don't worry. And I'm trying to tell them I'm not fine. I'm actually going to die like in 20 or 30 minutes. I'm sure of it. Yeah. And people don't realize that you like actually think you're dying.
No, they don't. And I think people conflate, again, it's like anxiety attacks and panic attacks and experiencing anxiety. It's like those
stress,
or stress. Yeah, it's like those are all such different things. You know, I was listening to a podcast this morning actually talking about the use of the word trauma, right? And how people are saying like, that was so traumatic, or like, this is my trauma. And people are really making like a light of the word trauma, whereas trauma's like a really impactful thing. It's a really important thing. Yeah. And so it's this fine line of like, how do we normalize that trauma is an experience that a lot of people have, but also keep like the importance of it and like use it in context that makes sense, so we're not, you know, like dismissing somebody's experience or like minimizing their experience, or making it feel, I'm trying to think of like the term to use of like someone telling you that, and it's you're like, oh, expert. I need to attend to this. Yeah, I know what you mean though. I don't know what term you're thinking of, but I know what you're saying. I was just looking here after the TikTok thing. So it's, what do you think, like, what do you tell people? Like, don't listen to TikTok at all? No, not at all. I love TikTok. If they come to you and they say, I saw this on TikTok, and how do you tell them that that's not what's happening without making them feel like bad about picking that up? Or what if they really deeply believe that? Yeah, I don't think I've had that experience so far. I've had clients that have shown me TikToks in session. I've emailed TikToks to clients. I've had them send them to me and be like, oh, haha, this was like funny, or this reminded me of this, or this really resonated for this reason. And so usually it's like we explore that. So they're like, yeah, what part of that, did resonate with you? Like, how do you apply it to your own experience? And so I think we just use a lot of, and I think this is like whole scale what I do in every session with everyone for everything forever and always is just use a lot of curiosity to understand their meaning and what's going on for them, right? And so then you kind of do a self-assessment of like, yeah, what did stick out and why is this important, and what parts of it do I want to take and what parts of it do I want to leave?
So that helps them, then they're aware, but how do you help them then work through something after you've kind of made them aware of the issue or topic?
Oh, is that part of my job? I'm just kidding. Yeah, so I always say like awareness is the first piece of anything, right? It's like, how can you work on something if you don't have like an awareness or an understanding? And so I think awareness is a huge part of it, right? My job is not to like give advice. It's not to solve people's problems. It's to basically like hold up, and the way I see it is to like hold up a mirror and say, you know, these are all the things that you're showing me, right? Is this accurate? Does that make sense to you? Is that what you're seeing? Okay, what do we want to do with it? And so from there, you know, we talk about like that would be the therapeutic goals and like what we're working towards, and you know, why do we want to work towards those things? What do we think will happen if we do it? And so that's where we might transition that awareness into the behaviors that we're changing, the relationships that we're engaging in, you know, how we show up in our relationships, how we ask others to show up in our relationships. That's kind of the pieces that come after that awareness.
Okay. I didn't know. I've been to a lot of therapy, a lot of different kinds. It never really seems to work out for me.
Oh, why do you think that is?
Oh, here we go. Do you want the clipboard?
Kind of now.
No, I need it. I don't know. They're all different, and usually I don't stay long enough to actually build a relationship.
Yeah.
But it's because I don't like them. Like there's one time I walked out.
Okay.
Like 20 minutes in.
Wow.
I just couldn't stand the lady.
Well, you know, that's your prerogative, though. I love that. Like, I commend you for that. I actually wrote a blog post on this because people are like, how do I pick a therapist? And I think I say to anyone, like, you should know, I think by doing a consult, usually first is ideal. You do like a 15-20 minute video call. You're like, how does this person talk about things? Do I think I actually like them? Because again, I think as a relational based therapist, like that's priority. Like I don't want anyone to feel like they have to come see me if they don't like me, if they don't like the way that I talk about things, if they don't like how they feel around me, if they don't feel that I'm, you know, like I am non-judgmental and I am non-biased and I do really care for them, then yeah, I wouldn't want to tell you all my secrets either. Like that sounds terrible.
Have you ever had, or well, you can't say probably, but what would happen if you didn't like the relationship from your end? Would you refer them to someone else or tell them, or how would that go?
Yeah, I guess something that, I don't know if this is like a personality feature or a feature of my job per se, I think I can always find something to like about anybody. And so I have had clients that I find maybe are like challenging to me, who have maybe like a lot of resistance in therapy, and I'm such an open person that I'm like, ooh, that's really resistant. I'm not really sure how to engage with that. But I try to pick something about them that I care for and that makes it, you know, that makes me want to stay, because I think that's so important as a therapist, is I do have to care. So if I see someone and they're being like really resistant, and sometimes that throws me again, because I'm like, yeah, like let's talk, let's do this, and they're like, I'm like, okay, but they're here for a reason. They picked me for a reason. They know the way that I work. They want to be here. They keep showing up. So I'm like, so this must be like a part of them, and maybe this is a really protective part of them that is saying it's not safe to open up, and like we're not there yet. And so I try to honor everybody's process, and, you know, maybe dig into like, what is that? Like, what is that? Or also dig into myself of like, what is my own, why am I having resistance to this person? Or what am I reading in them, you know, that is like distracting me from like my purpose here? And so I think it's a two-part of like, what is in them that is something that I can really connect with? And then what is my own resistance to why I'm feeling this way towards a person? Because 9 times out of 10, it says more about me and like my experiences than it does about the person who's sitting in front of me.
Do you have to go to therapy?
Absolutely.
Like, okay.
Yeah.
That's the end of that.
No, that's a hot topic, I think, among therapists, is like, do therapists need their own therapists? And like, if you ask, I think most, again, emotionally healthy therapists, we would all say like, yes. Because there is like, we're not supposed to be our own therapist. There's only so much self-analyzing you can do. And I think even the smartest therapist or the most self-aware therapist always has holes in their vision, just like any person. So I think any good, like reflective therapist who wants to do good work is going and asking someone else, like, what's going on with me? What do you see? Where are these holes?
Does it have to be someone you don't know?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
or someone you don't have a personal relationship with, I guess.
Yeah, that would be, I think, like the ethical standard for it in most regards is like, you want to be doing therapy with someone who doesn't know, like, who has no bias, right? And it's pretty hard to not have bias if that person is like your colleague, if that person is like someone you went to school with, whatever it is. So usually you need quite a few degrees of separation, I think, to be in that process with someone. The way that we view therapy now, I will say, the way that we do therapy, there's like, there's capitalist perspectives and there's like hierarchies and there are these things at play. And so therapy can mean so many different things, and there is therapy that can be done like in community that looks very different than the role of, I think, like a regulated therapist is doing it. So sorry for all of the like convoluted answers to everything.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah, it's complex.
You can open that. You can actually do it right near the microphone. People love that. Do you want to?
Is it like ASMR?
I don't know.
I feel like I'm scared.
This stuff sucks. They sponsor us. Liquid Death.
Are you allowed to say that on air then?
Well, they don't sponsor us, and it
I
sucks.
don't know if we can say that they sponsor us.
And then also that they suck.
They don't sponsor us. Do we have to cut that? We'll cut it. I never cut anything I say to cut, though. But no, I wanted them to sponsor us. How is it?
It's actually, you know what? I kind of actually like it, but because I think it's not as like aggressively bubbly as some of the other ones I've tried.
You like it? I'll cut the bad stuff then.
Yeah.
Liquid Death. It's awesome. Yeah. I hope we do cut the bad stuff. What were we just talking about? Oh, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Do you ever watch any movies or TV shows and think this is so outrageous how they're portraying psychology? Or is it usually accurate?
Like, yes and no, it's not. I don't think it's super accurate. What's the one I just watched? Okay, there was a new show on Prime, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And they have this therapist, and she she does therapy out of her home, for one, with like her kid is home. And then also she's always talking about all the artifacts in her office and like where they come from.
Spoiler.
This is
okay.
Yeah, it's not spoiler. But she's speaking about like the importance, like she comes off as very pretentious, and I thought that was like it was a really funny take.
That happens a lot in movies, I think. That's like the role. I was just thinking of that because on How I Met Your Mother, have you seen that?
Yeah.
You maybe haven't?
No, I haven't, but not for a number of years, so I'm just not sure what you're going to refer to yet.
Oh, well.
Anticipating.
One of the characters is dating, she's seeing someone, a psychologist, and then she starts dating him, like the next week after they break it off. He's like, I like you. I can't see you anymore.
Yes, I remember that.
They start dating, which is, I don't think, allowed. And then he's always like analyzing all of her friends. And that's why I brought that up.
Okay.
That's not accurate at all.
No, and I think in a lot of shows with therapists, there are like very like ethical boundary violations that the way that we practice, like at least in Alberta, would get you like banned forever. Like I would lose my job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only example I had.
Yeah.
That one show.
But it's entertainment, and so I think it's like, just like in entertainment, we make fun of kind of any job. Like there are things to poke fun at about therapists and the way that therapy is done.
What do you think about how they're always pretentious? Do you want to be pretentious?
I hope I'm never pretentious. I hope I never come across that way. No, I definitely don't want to be pretentious.
Maybe you'll cross the line from imposter syndrome just right to pretentious.
Just full on.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope not. I can't predict the future. But I think that's like, I think what can happen, right, is like therapists who don't engage in like community with other therapists and like talk to their colleagues and like have someone to talk to them about, you know, their work. I think if you exist in a silo in your work and you're on your own and you aren't in communication with other people to like kind of check you and like give you that feedback, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah. How do you follow trends in psychology? What way do you keep up?
I think I just try to keep up on like the reading. I do a lot of reading. So when, you know, different therapists are coming out with books that I'm interested in or pertain to my work, I try to like engage with those. So I try to keep up to date with like what is like the evidence saying, what is research saying, what's new research, what's changing. But at the end of the day, again, I think it's easy to fall down these rabbit holes of like, am I doing enough? Am I doing enough new trainings? Am I doing enough reading of new research or reading of new books? When at the end of the day, I try to like ground myself and root myself back into what my job actually is, which is not being a scientist, which is not being like an objective truth seeker, you know, which is to connect individually one-on-one with people and like hear their stories and create a space for them to be able to talk freely and openly and kind of like, you know, there's that famous quote, it's like we all are just walking each other home. And I think that's the biggest part of my role. You've never heard it?
No, I like it though.
It's one of my favorites, yeah.
Where's it from?
I'm so bad because I have it literally on a coaster in my office with the author of it, and I don't recall. But
I like it.
Yeah. And so I think I try to root into that again of my job isn't to be like updating people on like the newest facts and like data. It's to be a person with this other person in a room.
We know who it is.
Ram Dass.
Thank you.
That's what the producer's there for. Yeah, that threw me off. I was about to say something and I don't know what it was.
It's okay. We're talking about trends.
Oh yeah. Thank you. I needed that.
Yeah.
Is there like a therapist influencer or many of them, like celebrity therapists, not Dr. Phil, but like some other ones?
Yeah, there are.
Like, you know, in the fitness scene, there's all these online influencers. Do you follow them, the therapist ones?
I have. I followed some of them. I do follow some of them. I've unfollowed some of them. Yeah, I think that I have a hard time with this topic, and I like it. I'm actually glad you asked, because then I have to, maybe fully flesh out my feelings about it. Again, I love that different experts in their fields are bringing more knowledge to like the masses and the way that they share. And I think especially with the barriers of access to therapy, so with like affordable therapy, wait times, all of those things, sometimes people's only option is to like read about it online or follow certain people, you know, on Instagram or TikTok, because that's all they have access to. So that's huge and that's important. But I think also as therapists, we have to be really careful not to allow ourselves to fall into these roles of being gurus, right? Or being, you know, like advice givers, or being, you know, like life coaches. Like we have a very different role, and we have to be very careful about, again, I think the way that we engage like ethically. And that line can get blurred when you're like an Instagram famous therapist.
Yeah. How is it even allowed, really? I mean, I guess if they're posting like inspirational quotes, that's fine, but anything more than that, I don't know.
Well, and I think a lot of these people, they stop engaging in private practice. Like they stop meeting people one-on-one, right? They go on and they write books, or they do, you know, they do podcasts, or they start, I don't know, groups. Like they do different things that I'm not sure that they do engage in the same way. And again, like the regulations are kind of different everywhere you go for like what a therapist's role is. But I think that's, you know, what is the term we used earlier of like you could go from imposter syndrome to pretentious really fast. And it's like you can go from imposter syndrome to like guru ideology really fast too.
Yeah, even actually now that I think about it, the Secret and all that, it's almost become like a religion to people now. So far past what the first book, now there's new books coming out, new rules. Yeah,
it's like the cult of self-help, right?
Yeah. Is there a lot of those famous books that are maybe not as helpful as people think? Can you think of any?
No, I don't think any come to mind right off the top. Again, I think just like anything, I just hope that people are always like critical of the media that they're consuming and the things that they're reading, and always, going with a sort of feeling of, what parts of this resonate with me, because not all of it has to. So if you read The Secret and whether you loved it or you hated it, you can say, oh yeah, there are parts of it that I really liked and parts of it that I'm a bit skeptical of. I think when we go into this black and white thinking of we have to be like all in with any type of, whether that's therapeutic modality or certain therapist, I tell my clients all the time, like, if I say something and you don't agree with it or you don't like it, I want that to be a conversation. Like, let's talk about it. Maybe I misspoke. Maybe I don't have this other perspective that you have. So again, it's like, I'm a human. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to backtrack. I'm going to change my mind about certain things. And I would never want a client to be sitting in there, questioning my like authenticity or my ability to help them and not be able to talk to me about it.
Do you do breathing with people?
I'm not like a breathwork expert. I do breathing mostly. I believe in the power of like somatics, which is like body connection, knowing where you feel things in your body. Where is tension coming up? What does anxiety feel like? So I mostly do it when I have clients that are coming in maybe like in a heightened state or experiencing anxiety in the session, is we do a lot of like grounding, which would include like breath work to bring us back to the room, into presence, into a feeling of safety. So I incorporate it, but it's not like every client that comes in, I'm like, let's start with breathing.
It never works for me.
No,
I don't like it at all. I feel stupid doing it. And it just makes me spiral more. I'm like, I don't want to do this. I'm breathing fine. I'm probably never breathing fine, but I think I'm just not patient enough to relax in that way.
Yeah, I mean, possibly, or maybe there's just, a certain level of like vulnerability that it requires you to really like sit with your body and like engage in that experience of breathing that can be off-putting for a lot of people.
It really annoys me.
Yeah.
The whole I don't know why. I could probably do what they say. I don't know, but I don't even want to. I just want to talk about my problems. I don't want to breathe right now.
Yeah, and maybe that's just like where you are at your journey.
Thanks. So I was talking to you about BetterHelp the other day. You didn't really have an opinion on it, I guess, but I just feel like, how can people connect? Sometimes it's just texting, which is easy to talk to people through texting, but it could be an AI. Like, you have no real connection with the person. And I don't know their training. Maybe it says, but...
Yeah, I don't know. I think BetterHelp is based in the States, so I'm not 100% sure how it works. I'm, again, like, I guess... where I go immediately with that is like with this relational piece again. It's like if you're just like texting some blob or like, right, like you don't have any conceptualization of like who they are, what it is. Some people do want that. Like they just want to talk to someone who like doesn't know them, that they don't know, to like tell them what to do or how to manage or how to cope with something. And like maybe that's a method that's very helpful for some people, but I don't think it's helpful for most, right? I think that I would rather talk to people about, in a therapy session, hey, when you're out in the world and you feel like you need to talk to someone immediately and like your therapist isn't available, right? It's like, okay, well, who are your primary relationships? How can we have a communication style or a bond or a relationship where, you have a friend that you can text that says, whether it's, you have an emoji that you send them that is like, this is code for like, I need to talk to you. Or do you have someone in your life that you can text, hey, I'm having a really hard time with something, I'm having a bit of anxiety, like, are you available? I think if you don't have real people in your life that you can do that with, like, that's a problem.
Yeah. It seems kind of like the Uber Eats of therapy.
Yeah. And maybe for some people, right, like I think there are people who are very lonely and who are very isolated, like sometimes like differently abled, whatever's going on, and like maybe they don't have a support network, maybe they don't have people. So it's like none of these things again are black and white. There's so much nuance, and I think it's important to raise like the benefits of it, but also some of like the concerns.
Do people often see two different kinds of therapists at the same time?
No, not often. Sometimes that can be like, we would call it contraindicated. So we would not want that because they could have like interfering like therapeutic goals, or it might be a way for like the client to, again, maybe be like compartmentalizing some of the things that they're working on. I think there's exceptions to everything. So there are people who maybe see someone specifically for EMDR, which is like a trauma processing, and then maybe they see someone else specifically for talk therapy of different issues. Or like you see a couples therapist with your partner, and then you see a different, like an individual therapist. So again, there's different situations where you would do that, but I don't know what purpose it would serve to see like 2 different therapists for talk therapy.
With couples therapy, is it ever someone's, can it be one of the people's therapists giving the couple therapy?
Yeah, absolutely it can. I think that works best when the individual who's seeing the therapist isn't solely focused on relationship issues. Like they go for their own reasons and other things that they're working on. And then they also have emotionally healthy relationships or largely healthy relationships. So then as the therapist, you have, you're able to put aside like biases or whatever that person's talked about. So say I have an individual that comes in and they're talking about a partner who is presenting as being very like abusive, emotionally, mentally, in whatever way. And then they're like, oh, could we come here for couples? I'd be like, well, no, because I don't know how I could feasibly like promote this relationship, because in couples counseling, like the relationship is your client. It's like, I don't know how I could ethically, right, and like in good conscience promote this relationship and work on it with the both of you when privately I know that there are these other things that are happening or these other things that are going on. So absolutely you can, but again, it's like dependent on the situation.
It kind of seems like it wouldn't work out because the therapist would have an existing relationship and would maybe lean a certain way all the time.
Yeah, I think they can. And again, I think that's where you have to be a very reflective practitioner. And where you have to like accurately assess like, oh, do I have a negative bias towards this one person, or maybe an overly positive bias towards this other person that is going to cause me to treat them differently or hold one person's word as like more important or feelings as more important than the other. So you have to be kind of constantly assessing of like what's even coming up for you as a therapist and the way that you're engaging with these people, and what does that look like.
How do you, when you go home, how do you release all that, like for your own self-care?
I think part of it is like forced, because I have a toddler who commands like a lot of attention and like presence. He's a very sensitive little dude, so he very much is like, we're home, he needs like 20 minutes of physical contact, then it's like intentional playtime. So all of it has to be very intentional with just like, I think, who he is and the type of presence he commands. Another part of it is like maybe sometimes I don't, but it's not like heavy. I think there's this, and maybe it is for some people, there's a conceptualization of, therapist work is so hard and we listen to people's problems and then we go home and it's heavy. But I don't ever feel that way. My work makes me feel lighter. My work makes me feel softer. Connecting with people like one-to-one on this basis, like day to day, feels very enriching for me. And so usually I feel like very connected and I feel grounded and I feel very fulfilled by my work. Sometimes I go home and I think about, there's this chapter in this book I want to reread as it relates to my client, or there's something I want to look up as it relates to how I can help this client, or maybe there's a book recommendation I want to send them. Maybe I did come across a TikTok or a reel that makes me think of this client and I'm going to send it to them. So there are pieces that come up, and it's generally not a feeling of something I need to like put aside or something that's negatively impacting me. And in movies,
you always see therapists get home and just like have a glass of whiskey all the time. They just like have drinking problems to handle it. So what do you have parts of the job you don't like, or what are your favorite and least favorite parts, I guess?
Yeah, so I think, again, there's some pieces, and I'm still learning. I mean, like, I'm a white woman who's, grown up in Canada and who has a lot of privilege, but I'm starting to see some of the patterns of, and I think in school I started to see the patterns of, like, a lot of the way that we do therapy is very, like, a lot of the kind of the founding fathers of therapy are all, like, white European men. And so there's been these like, and there was a very hierarchical, and it was like very clinical, and there's a lot of like ethical guidelines and certain boundaries that we have that sometimes make being a, like maybe call it like modern day or like anti-capitalist, like feminist, intersectional therapist, it makes some of the like constraints based off how we conceive of therapy enact in that role. And so now I forget the root of the question because I went on that tangent.
Your favorite and least favorite.
Yeah, so that I don't like some of the sometimes the limitations that it feels. So like there's a lot of discourse in therapy around what we call self-disclosure. So that is like sharing about, you know, parts of you and your life with your clients.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, when you're in school, they're like, you have to be so careful about self-disclosure, and it can be so harmful, and it can, you know, it can ruin relationships, and like you're the therapist, and you know that's not your job. And they're like, sometimes it's helpful, but they mostly kind of scare you away from it. And then again, I'm like, relationally, I don't see how people are able to like trust me and want to talk to me and feel safe with me if they know nothing about me. And so again, it's that fine line of not making a session about you or like your stories where, hey, this is an experience that I've had or something I want to share with you that I think would really resonate or would make a lot of sense. And so I think that's on the, you know, that connection and that sense of like community and kinship you feel in the therapy room. Sometimes there's like this weight hanging over my head of like, what would my ethical standards and like what would my regulatory body say I can do here or that I can't do here. And so I think some of it is like the constraints that I feel within that of how I'm allowed to practice versus maybe how I would practice had I not had those constraints.
Is it changing at all?
I think so. Yeah, I think that again, a lot of those regulatory bodies are doing a better job of incorporating different perspectives, trying to use like like colonial lenses, trying to bring in different like cultural like awareness and sensitivities and humility and knowledge. So I do think that there's this trajectory where like, hey, it can look like a bunch of different things and there are other considerations we have to have here. But with anything of like in these systems, it's what we, you know, the way that we're able to practice versus the changes that we're making to like the guidelines and the rule books, like those take so much longer.
It seems like it would be a helpful tool to relate to people if you could talk about yourself. Like the police do that when they're dealing with things. And drop my pen. I don't need a pen. You know, I haven't used anything from this clipboard. I'm just holding it.
It looks good. Looks professional.
Yeah. It seems like it'd be a really good tool, and you're kind of not allowed to do that, or frowned upon, I guess.
You're allowed to. It's just, again, it's like very kind of like warned against, or it's seen as something that you have to be very, very like cautious and kind of, I think when I was an early practitioner, I got scared away from doing it. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to not ever share. And I started that way of being like, even if I had something, I was like, oh, I feel like this would be, you know, so helpful to know about me or an experience I had that would be relatable. There was a part of me that was like, oh, I can't do any of that. And then as I got more comfortable in my role, I started understanding what are helpful versus non-helpful disclosures. I try to do kind of like ongoing consent with my clients of like, I think I have a personal experience that might help here. Would you like me to share it with you? No one's ever said no, but I like to give them that opportunity.
When you're in school, what was the most interesting thing you learned? What really got you excited? Anything?
It's hard because I love so much of it.
Yeah. Like what? I'm trying to learn from you. I only listened to 15 minutes of that podcast today. I know Pavlov. That's it.
Sometimes like the experiments that we used to do, I think are so interesting. I mean, we can't do probably like 90% of the ones that we did do before.
Tell me about one.
Let's see, like the Stanford prison experiments.
Oh, I know that one.
Yeah, like we would never do that.
Tell everyone about it.
Okay, well, let's see from, again, my knowledge. I haven't brushed up on this. So the basis of the Stanford prison experiments was, a psychologist at Stanford decided to create an experiment with his psych students where he had like half of them were prisoners and half of them were guards. And so they created like a literal, like a fake prison, and they had them engage in kind of just like day-to-day, you're a guard, you're a prisoner. And it was an experiment to see like I think it was accessing like total like authority and power and like what it does to people, and you know the lengths people will go if they are given this power and this authority. And it went maybe like as predicted, but quite horrifically. And it had really long-term, like it was a very long-term like traumatic effects on people, and that would be like both for the prison guards and for the prisoners. And so the guards, with you know relative impunity, started kind of doing more and more horrific things to the prisoners, getting them to engage in really like embarrassing behavior, like taunting them, you know, beginning to act with more and more like cruelty. And the prisoners who were being like, you know, like oppressed and like subjugated and made to be like really, really embarrassed and do these horrible things, like obviously incurred a lot of trauma from that. And so the result was like, yeah, when people are given this like absolute power, like it corrupts, and it, you know, it creates these really scary hierarchies, and people who would in regular life, you know, never like demean or want to embarrass someone or harm them in any way, like they will go to lengths they never thought that they could.
That's like if they just wanted to test Lord of the Flies, like let's just put a bunch of kids on an island. Yeah,
essentially, only we actually did say you have power and you don't. Right? So, but it was like real life with adults too, which is
how long did that last, do you know?
No,
we'll find out.
It was like, it was not an incredibly short period of time, but it was an incredibly short period of time for I think the lengths that the experiment went to. Yeah.
I saw something similar to that. There's a documentary called We Live in Public. It was around in 2000, 2 years?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
1 to 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah, which was like nothing. Quickly. And I wish I could remember some of like the behaviors or the things that they did, but like it was horrific.
Sorry, I read that wrong. It was scheduled for 1 to 2 weeks. Ultimately had to be terminated on only the 6th day.
Oh.
That's how bad it
went. Under a week. Yeah. That's insane.
Yeah. Or like, there was another experiment where they had, it was like a voice, they had 2 people, and one person was hooked up to these machines, like these electrodes, and they were basically, and then the other person had the control of the electrodes. And if the other person answered a question like incorrectly, the person who had the electrode things was supposed to administer a shock. And the shock started really low. It was kind of like a little tickle. It was not too bad. And this voice over the intercom, if they answered incorrectly, would be like, you know, like shock them, and then they would. And then the shock level kept like increasing, and the person could see that the other person was in an increasing amount of pain, and the shocks were getting a lot worse. But the voice would be like, you must shock them, like you have to. And again, people who in regular life would like, I would be like, no, absolutely. Like, I'm going to flip this table. I'm walking out. I'm not going to do that. The vast majority of the people continued to administer increasingly painful shocks to the point where it was an actor. They weren't administering real shocks, but the actor would like pass out or act like they were in an immense amount of pain, and people would keep going.
Why? Was it like if you don't shock them, you get shocked?
No, it was the authority.
Oh.
It was this like unseen authority of someone telling them that they had to do something, right? And so it was bringing up again, like, you know, that idea of like how people conceive of authority, you know, in our lives, and, you know, the power that like police have and the power that different authorities have, and how a lot of people like don't question it, right? A lot of people, even if we think we wouldn't, and we're like, absolutely, I would never do that. It's like when put in those positions where, you know, an assumed authority is telling you have to do something, a lot of people will comply.
I usually do.
Why is that?
Just why not? It's just easier, less friction that way, I guess.
Well, and I think that's that's what it's trying to point out is like, is the friction, like, you have to make that decision of what are the consequences of challenging this authority and not doing what is asked versus what are the consequences of doing, you know, unquestioning, abiding by what this authority is asking of you, and what if it does result in the harm of another person.
That one I was just talking about, We Live in Public. Can you see how long that went on? So they all agreed to be on, it was like when the internet started, it was in around 2000. They agreed to be on what was a reality show, I guess. They all had cameras. It was like 24/7. It wasn't really a show. They were just filming in this underground bunker. And they all started kind of going crazy. And in the end, the police had to like pry it open, and the guy got arrested for doing it. I don't think he was a scientist in any way.
Mm-hmm.
He was just doing an experiment.
Yeah.
But those kind of things are interesting.
Yeah, they are. And so I think that's, like intriguing to learn about, I think, where we've come from and like the things that we take for granted in society, and how like power structures work. But I think it's done a lot to illuminate, people, and like maybe we have more critical thinking and maybe we are more willing to question authority than we would have been had some of these experiments not happened. So I think those are like important pieces of it, while also acknowledging that like some of these experiments were so unethical and caused a lot of, can you imagine being the person like administering those shocks and then being told after like, oh, so you just like don't question authority, you were so willing to hurt this person? Like that would be really distressing to experience.
Yeah, there's a lot more limits on science now than there used to be, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even with animals to a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
Like the test they did for weed,
mm-hmm.
on gorillas, they just gave them like hundreds of times more than they should.
Oh, geez Louise.
They just like hooked up like a face mask.
Yeah.
And basically like suffocated them.
Yeah.
And then deemed it like...
It was like 300 joints.
It's gonna kill you, but yeah, it was like 300 joints in like 2 minutes or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, like so no one would ever
Just
even do
suffocated
that.
them by smoke.
No.
Yeah.
But I guess, I mean, they did find something. It wasn't good.
Well, that's the problem though, right? It's like how much harm are we willing to, like what is the level of risk or harm we're willing to impose on animals or on people,
Mm-hmm.
to figure out what like our limitations are. And I think there's, that could be a forever conversation about, ethical science.
I have a book called Big Ideas Simply Explained, a psychology book.
Cool.
I haven't opened it yet. I bought a bunch of them on different topics, but I wish I read it before this so we had something to talk about. I know Pavlov.
Yeah.
Yeah, Freud.
Yeah, conditioning, Freud.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what else can you teach me? I'm not reading anything, just...
I have a question.
Yeah.
What do you think about psychedelic assisted therapy?
Yeah, it's a topic, again, I don't know much about. It just hasn't been like my schooling, but I think from what I do know about it is like there is increasing evidence that it is helpful for a lot of people. I think under very, again, specific circumstances and for certain things. Again, we've had so many restrictions and constraints with psychedelics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like vilifying them, and it's been... So it hasn't been very long that we've actually been allowed to experiment with these things and like learn about them and learn about like the positive effects and the benefits. But the research has been good. I haven't seen a lot of any of the negative implications of it so far, but I imagine, again, just like anything, there would be.
I've seen some studies on PTSD with soldiers that were good.
Yeah.
I would try it in a microdose.
Yeah, and like again, there's ways, like some people maybe like use psychedelics and they're like, oh, that is my therapy, and they're like, this is how I'm engaging in it. And then there are actual real life like mediums of doing like ketamine assisted therapy and like using psilocybin. Like there are ways to do it within also like therapeutic contexts, rather than just being like, oh, I'm taking mushrooms to go on this like trip to discover myself, which is not to say that that's not like authentic or helpful to some people, but it's like the difference between someone being like, I'm going to treat my PTSD with ketamine versus I'm going to treat my PTSD with ketamine, with therapists who are going to like walk alongside me in this and help me process it.
Yeah. It'd be good if you could work with someone who is documenting the whole thing for other people too in the future. But yeah, I would try it. I don't know why. For what?
We have places actually in Calgary that do it.
Like psychology is what, like 100 years old? So even that's pretty new.
Yeah.
I don't know how old it is.
Yeah.
What year is it?
A bit older. But yeah, but it's always developing and always changing, right? It's like it'll be fascinating to see where psychology is in 10, 20, 50 years, where, psychedelic assisted therapy is in that amount of time. It's always changing. And I think we're always doing the best that we can with the knowledge that we have to date.
It's probably going to change so much with social media and you know,
Mm-hmm.
the internet, AI,
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
around it. It's almost like a whole new,
Mm-hmm.
you need a whole new book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and
Yeah.
that's why luckily they are always writing kind of like new ones, and there's
Mhm.
new things to learn. I do really like that it's been very, like, it's becoming much more destigmatized. Like, a lot of people, I think especially in our generation, are more willing to talk about accessing therapy, you know, like why they go to therapy, what it's been helpful for. I think that's been huge in just allowing people to say, like, hey, you can go to therapy, and not only if you've experienced trauma, or not only if you feel like something is like hugely wrong with you. It's like therapy is for everybody, you know, therapy is just for humans.
I tell everyone it's good for you. Everyone should go.
Yeah.
It's like a lot harder to convince men to go, I think, but
Yeah.
it's good for everyone.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. And I'm always hoping that, yeah, we're kind of turning the tides on it. And I get, like anything, it's kind of like slow and it's trickling down, but it's a good change to see.
I don't know. What do you think the people's issue is with going? If they think it's embarrassing, like there's something wrong with them.
I think some people, I think there's a culture of like hyper independence in our society as well, with this idea that like I can solve all of my own problems, or I don't need to talk about them, or, you know, oh yeah, that doesn't faze me anymore, or like that doesn't affect me, is something I hear a lot of people say, like, oh, I dealt with that, it doesn't bother me anymore. I think there's a lot of people that have this notion that, I think there is a notion still that it is like weak, or it means that you can't handle things on your own, that sometimes prevents people. And then I also think that there's an added vulnerability factor of, you're going to sit with someone, and the whole idea is that you do have to talk about yourself and be very vulnerable and be very open, and that's scary for a lot of people.
Do you think there's people that don't need therapy, or it's just good for everyone?
I think there's tons of people that don't need therapy, but
wouldn't benefit from it, I guess.
I don't know if there's anyone that wouldn't benefit from it.
Even like once a month, maybe. Yeah,
eat like once every 3 months, once every 6 months. Like, I don't know that there's anyone that couldn't benefit from, you know, a very intentional time to go sit down and talk about like what's going on with you. I think, yeah, like reciprocal. I love when people have very robust like support systems, and they have friends they can talk to all the time, or family they can talk to, you know, chosen family, whatever it is. I'm like, that's therapy in and of itself. Like, that's healing. But it's like reciprocal, you know, you have to know if they have the capacity for it, or what's going on in their lives. You know, there's a give and take. And like some people, I think everyone can benefit from having a period of time that's just for them to talk about themselves, and not feel like, oh, am I putting pressure on this person, which I wouldn't want people to feel anyway. And I think that's why it's so important in relationships to say, like, oh, do you have time to talk? Can I talk to you about this thing? But it's like with a therapist, you don't have to ask that.
Do people you know try to use you as that person and have like free therapy all the time?
No, I don't think. I have amazing friends. I love, all the people in my life know my job, and are. I think it's also something I've kind of always done. Like, it's a person I've always been, is someone that is, I hope at least, this is my conceptualization of myself from what I think my friends would say. I've always been a very easy person to talk to, very like open-minded. I've always had a great interest in a lot of these things, so I like to be trusted in that way and to help. But I also, you know, they also know that I'm coming to them as a friend. I'm helping them as a friend. I'm listening as a friend, and I'm not putting on like a therapy hat with them, and that's very different. And so like all of my friends also have their own therapists that they see for those things.
So how do you stop yourself from analyzing people? Do you you just don't?
No, I wouldn't say that I just don't, but I guess maybe I see it as like I also try to make sure, again, it's more about controlling my role in those relationships.
Do you think you're going to do it with your child?
Well, yeah, I think like in a way of like understanding people and like in my relationships and my child, my friends and my partner, is like I try to correlate like why are they engaging in this behavior, or why might they say this thing, you know, what's coming up for them, what's going on. But again, I think that's a part of that's always been who I am, and the difference is like I still am showing up as a mom or as a wife or as a friend versus I'm showing up as a therapist, which is a very different thing.
I know with my fiance, I guess she'll be my wife at the time this comes out. she's a nurse, and
Mm-hmm.
people are just like, is this cancerous? Just like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm gonna just take my shirt off at the dinner table.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was wondering if people do that to you, like,
Mhm.
I'm feeling this way. What does this mean?
Yeah, not so much. I
I'm
think
gonna
people
start
are
doing
scared
that.
of doing that.
I'm gonna do that to you from now on.
Yeah.
Now that
please
we've
do.
reconnected,
Now that, yeah.
I'm gonna text you in the
Shoot it
night,
out.
like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm having a panic attack.
Absolutely. And you can. And again, I think that's the beauty of friendships. It's like, yeah, that's thank you. Like, thank you for trusting me. Thank you to coming, to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's my responsibility to have those boundaries of like, oh, I can't address that. You should talk to your therapist about it. Oh, I, don't have the capacity to talk about it right now. I've had a really hard day, right? That's my job. That's not my friend's job.
Mm-hmm. What are we at for time, Chris?
An hour and 10 minutes.
Look
An
at
hour and
us.
10 minutes?
Yeah.
It's the longest podcast I've ever done.
I'm so interesting.
I always rate at 55 minutes or so.
Mhm.
Ask what the time is.
It's
I was
just-
too into it, I guess.
Oh, or I'm just rambling. I don't give you space.
Yeah, so I guess we could be done. Do you have anything you want to teach me quick? Rapid fire?
Oh, God. No, thank you for having me on. This
Oh.
is really fun.
I thought you would have one more thing. I was hoping.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, well.
Let me think if there's anything interesting.
Are you going to start doing a podcast circuit now that you've done this? You're like comfortable.
I'm just gonna, like,
you
visit.
might be a therapist influencer.
No, I think this was like a fun to figure. I didn't really know what to expect. I don't think I had any expectations, which was really nice.
Did you expect all these cameras and everything?
No. I don't know if I expected the lights to be so bright.
These aren't cameras. I don't know
No,
why
they're
I
not.
pointed at the
I don't think I
lights.
expected the lights to be bright, but I've watched like that you guys have these thingamabobs.
Oh, microphones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
On that note, let's just wrap.
Okay,
That was good.
awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Okay.